There are moments in life that do not arrive with fanfare. No trumpet sounds, no spotlight appears. The world does not pause to announce that something essential is about to happen. Instead, a quiet sentence enters the room of your mind. A thought you almost ignore, a feeling you cannot quite explain, a sudden stillness in the middle of a crowded day. And years later, you realize that was the moment everything began to change. Perhaps this message is one of those moments. Not because it contains secret knowledge, not because it predicts the future, but because there are seasons of the human soul when we become unable to hear ourselves. We move from task to task, conversation to conversation, obligation to obligation, until the noise of living becomes louder than the voice of being. We know how to answer emails, meet deadlines, solve problems, and keep moving. Yet somewhere beneath the movement, a quieter question waits. What if the life I am maintaining is no longer the life that is calling me? That question frightens us because it threatens the identity we have carefully built. Human beings are not only afraid of failure, often we are afraid of outgrowing the version of ourselves that once kept us safe. The familiar, even when it is painful, feels trustworthy. The unknown, even when it holds possibility, feels dangerous. So we stay. We stay in conversations that shrink us. We stay in routines that numb us. We stay loyal to old stories long after they have stopped telling the truth. We carry them like heavy coats in the middle of summer, wondering why we are exhausted. I once met an elderly gardener who spent every morning tending a small patch of earth behind his home. One day I asked him why he cut back even the healthiest branches. He smiled and said, "Because growth is not the same as flourishing. Sometimes a branch must lose its direction before the tree can find its shape." Those words stayed with me. We live in a culture that celebrates accumulation. More achievements, more possessions, more visibility, more certainty. But the deepest transformations rarely begin with gaining. They begin with releasing. A musician removes unnecessary notes. A sculptor removes stone. A river reaches the sea because it keeps letting go of every shore. Maybe what cannot wait is not another ambition. Maybe it is the courage to release what is already over. There is a peculiar grief that comes when we realize we have been waiting for permission that no one was ever going to give. Permission to rest, permission to change, permission to disappoint expectations, permission to begin again. Many people spend years standing at the edge of their own lives, rehearsing a future they never enter. They say, when things settle down, I will listen to myself. When I am less afraid, I will speak. When I am more prepared, I will begin. But life has a quiet sense of urgency, not the urgency of panic, but the urgency of truth. The seasons do not negotiate. The tide does not wait for certainty, and neither does the soul. This is why some messages arrive precisely when we need them most. Not because they change our circumstances overnight, but because they interrupt our sleepwalking. They remind us that we are not machines designed only to produce. We are meaning-making creatures. We ache for coherence between who we appear to be and who we know ourselves to be when the room is silent. Think about the last time you felt fully alive, not entertained, not distracted, alive. Perhaps it was during a conversation where you forgot to perform. Perhaps it was while watching rain move across a window, or holding someone's hand, or creating something with no guarantee of applause. In those moments, time behaves differently. The mind stops bargaining. Presence returns. That is not a small thing. That is a compass. The tragedy of many lives is not that people aim too high and fail. It is that they spend decades ignoring the compass while becoming experts at following maps drawn by other people. They achieve what was expected and lose contact with what was essential. But here is the beautiful and unsettling truth. The self you abandoned has not abandoned you. It waits, patiently, beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the roles you perform. It waits in the things that repeatedly move you, in the dreams that refuse to disappear, in the questions that return at midnight. And when it calls, it does not always call loudly. Sometimes it whispers, enough. Sometimes it asks, what are you pretending not to know? Sometimes it simply places a feeling in your chest that will not leave. Do not rush past that feeling. We often imagine transformation as a dramatic event, a mountain climbed, a speech delivered, a door slammed shut. Yet the most important changes are usually invisible at first. A person decides to tell the truth. A parent chooses patience over pride. A stranger forgives themselves for being human. Someone who has been surviving quietly decides to start living deliberately. These are not small acts. They alter the architecture of a life. And if you are tired, truly tired, not only in your body but in your spirit, hear this carefully. Exhaustion is not always a sign that you are weak. Sometimes it is evidence that you have been carrying a self that no longer fits. The soul grows weary when it must continually translate itself into a language that is not its own. What would happen if, just for a moment, you stopped trying to become impressive and started trying to become honest? honest about what hurts, honest about what matters, honest about what is ending, honest about what is quietly trying to be born. That honesty may not make life easier immediately, but it makes life real, and a real life, even with uncertainty, is infinitely more nourishing than a perfectly managed illusion. There is an old image I return to often, a lantern carried through a dark forest. The lantern does not illuminate the entire journey. It reveals only the next few steps, yet those few steps are enough. Every meaningful path in human history has been walked this way by people who could not see the whole road but trusted the light they had. You do not need complete certainty to move forward. You need enough honesty to take the next step, enough humility to admit what is no longer working, enough courage to remain present while the old story dissolves, enough faith to believe that losing one version of yourself is not the same as losing yourself. Because the truth is, the life that is meant for you is not hiding somewhere in the future. It is already pressing gently against this moment, asking to be noticed. It speaks through your deepest values, your quietest longings, your most persistent questions. It asks less, what will you achieve? And more, what kind of person will you become while you are here? So if this message has found you in a season of confusion, let it be a pause. If it has found you in grief, let it be a hand on your shoulder. If it has found you in success that feels strangely empty, let it be a mirror. And if it has found you on the edge of a decision you have delayed for too long, let it be a gentle reminder that your life is not asking for perfection, it is asking for participation. One day, years from now, you may look back on an ordinary evening, the moment you stopped arguing with your own heart, the moment you chose truth over performance, presence over distraction, courage over postponement, and you will realize that nothing spectacular happened on the outside. The world kept turning. Cars passed, phones rang, people hurried by, but inside you, a door opened, and that was enough. Because the message that could not wait was never telling you to become someone else. It was telling you that the person you have been searching for, chasing, proving, and postponing, has been quietly waiting for you to come home. And the moment you stop running from that meeting, your real life begins. One of the greatest challenges of modern life is not the lack of information, it is the lack of silence. Never before have human beings been surrounded by so many voices, opinions, notifications, demands, and expectations. From the moment we wake up, the world begins speaking to us. It tells us what to buy, what to fear, what to achieve, how to appear, and who we should become. The noise is so constant that many people no longer recognize it as noise. They simply call it life. Yet beneath all this activity, another voice exists. It is quieter, slower, and far less dramatic. It does not compete for attention. It does not shout. It waits. This is the voice of the soul, the part of us that knows what truly matters, what feels meaningful, and what aligns with our deepest nature. The problem is that the louder the external world becomes, the harder it is to hear what is happening within. Many people spend years responding to demands without ever questioning whether those demands deserve a response. They become experts at managing responsibilities, but strangers to themselves. They know how to solve problems for everyone around them, yet they struggle to answer a simple question. How am I, really? Not the socially acceptable answer. Not the answer that sounds productive or optimistic. The honest answer. This disconnect rarely happens overnight. It develops gradually. A person ignores their intuition once because it seems impractical, then again because it seems inconvenient. Over time, the habit of ignoring oneself becomes normal. The inner voice grows fainter, not because it has disappeared, but because it has been interrupted so many times. Imagine living beside a river for years. At first you hear the water constantly, its movement becomes part of your awareness, but eventually you stop noticing it. The river still flows exactly as before, yet your mind has learned to filter it out. Something similar happens with the wisdom within us. It remains present, but familiarity and distraction cause us to overlook it. Often the soul begins speaking through discomfort. Restlessness appears where excitement once existed. Achievements lose their emotional impact. A strange emptiness emerges even when life looks successful from the outside. Many people mistake these feelings for problems to eliminate. They rush to become busier, more entertained, or more distracted. But sometimes these feelings are messages rather than malfunctions. The soul has a remarkable way of signaling when we are living too far from ourselves. A life can appear perfect on paper and still feel hollow in experience. A person can be admired by others while secretly feeling disconnected from who they are. They can fulfill every expectation and still sense that something essential is missing. This is not necessarily a sign that they have failed. Sometimes it is evidence that they have spent too much time listening outward and not enough time listening inward. The voice of the soul often emerges during unexpected moments. A quiet walk, a sleepless night, a conversation that touches something deep inside, a sudden feeling while watching the sunset. These moments create cracks in the noise. Through those cracks, truth enters, and truth is rarely complicated. It often arrives as a simple realization, a recognition that something must change, acknowledgement of a dream that refuses to disappear, acceptance of a feeling that has been denied for too long. The soul does not demand perfection. It asks only to be heard. When we finally create space for that voice, we discover something surprising. The answers we have been searching for in the world were often waiting within us all along, hidden beneath the noise, patiently waiting for us to become quiet enough to listen. One of the most invisible forces shaping human lives is the belief that permission must come from somewhere outside ourselves. From childhood, we learn to seek approval. We look to parents, teachers, authority figures, and society for signals that tell us whether we are doing the right thing. This is a natural part of development. Yet for many people, this pattern quietly continues long into adulthood. They may grow older, gain experience, and achieve success, but deep inside, they are still waiting for someone to say, "Now you can begin." The tragedy is that this permission often never arrives. Many dreams remain unrealized not because people lack talent or opportunity, but because they are waiting for certainty. They are waiting to feel completely ready before taking action. They are waiting for fear to disappear before making a decision. They are waiting for a perfect moment that exists only in imagination. Life, however, rarely unfolds according to such conditions. There is something fascinating about the way fear disguises itself. Most people think fear appears as panic or obvious anxiety, but often it wears more respectable clothing. It appears as excessive planning, endless preparation, constant research, repeated postponement. It convinces us that we need just a little more time, a little more confidence, a little more validation before we can move forward. Months become years, years become decades, and eventually people realize they have spent much of their lives preparing to live rather than actually living. The desire for permission is deeply connected to the desire for safety. If someone else approves our choices, we feel protected from responsibility. If others support our path, we believe the risk becomes smaller. Yet personal growth has always required a willingness to step into uncertainty without guarantees. Every meaningful journey contains moments when no authority can provide the answer. No one can tell you exactly when to trust yourself. No one can perfectly predict whether a decision will succeed. No one can remove every doubt before you take the first step. At some point, maturity involves accepting that uncertainty is not a problem to solve, but a reality to navigate. Many people imagine courage as the absence of fear. In truth, courage often looks much quieter. It is the decision to move while fear is still present. It is speaking when your voice shakes. It is changing direction when others expect you to remain the same. It is listening to a deeper truth, even when it conflicts with external expectations. History is filled with people who changed their lives not because they felt ready, but because they reached a moment when staying the same became more painful than moving forward. The comfort zone that once felt secure began to feel like a prison. The familiar path no longer matched the person they were becoming. This moment arrives differently for everyone. For some, it comes after disappointment. For others, after success that feels strangely empty. For others still, it arrives through a quiet realization that keeps returning no matter how often it is ignored. The realization usually sounds simple. This is not enough. I cannot continue pretending. Something needs to change. When such moments appear, the mind often responds with resistance. It asks for proof. It demands certainty. It searches for guarantees. Yet the soul speaks a different language. It understands that some truths must be lived before they can be fully understood. Imagine standing before a closed door. You spend years analyzing what might exist on the other side. You gather opinions. You study possibilities. You imagine outcomes. But eventually, there is only one way to know. You must turn the handle. The remarkable thing is that most people already possess far more wisdom than they realize. They often know what conversation needs to happen. They know what truth needs to be acknowledged. They know what chapter has ended, and what dream continues calling them. What they lack is not knowledge, but permission. And the permission they are seeking cannot be granted by society, by circumstances, or by another person. It arrives the moment they understand that their life is not a waiting room. The moment they stop asking whether they are allowed to begin and start recognizing that every day they postpone their own becoming, they are surrendering time that can never be reclaimed. The most transformative decisions rarely begin with certainty. They begin with a quiet act of self-trust, a willingness to honor what feels true even when the road ahead remains unclear, a recognition that life is not asking you to be fearless before you move. It is asking you to move despite your fear, because the permission you have been waiting for has been yours all along. One of the most subtle dangers in life is that it is possible to spend years moving in the right direction according to everyone else and still feel lost within yourself. From an early age, we are handed maps. Some come from family, some from culture, some from education, and some from the unspoken expectations that surround us. These maps promise security. They show us what success should look like, what milestones we should reach, and what paths are considered respectable or desirable. There is nothing inherently wrong with maps. They can provide guidance, structure, and valuable wisdom. The problem begins when we mistake someone else's map for our own compass. A map tells you where other people have gone. A compass helps you discover where you need to go. Many people spend their lives following routes designed by others. They pursue careers because they seem practical. They adopt beliefs because they are widely accepted. They make choices because they are expected rather than because they are deeply aligned. Over time, they become skilled at meeting external standards while gradually losing contact with their inner direction. This disconnect often happens so slowly that it goes unnoticed. Life appears successful on the surface. Goals are achieved. Responsibilities are fulfilled. Approval is received. Yet somewhere beneath these accomplishments, an uncomfortable feeling begins to emerge. It is difficult to describe. Nothing seems obviously wrong, yet something feels missing. This feeling is often the voice of the inner compass. The compass does not speak in the language of status or recognition. It speaks through meaning, through curiosity, through a sense of aliveness that appears when we engage with what genuinely matters to us. It points toward authenticity rather than approval. The challenge is that following a compass requires trust. When you follow a map, the route is already defined. You can see where you are supposed to go. You can compare your progress with others. There is comfort in knowing the destination has been validated by those who came before. A compass offers no such guarantees. It provides direction, not certainty. This is why so many people ignore it. The human mind naturally seeks predictability. We want reassurance that our efforts will lead somewhere worthwhile. We want proof before commitment. Yet the most meaningful journeys rarely provide evidence in advance. They ask for faith before clarity. Think about the moments in life when you felt most alive. Often they were not moments of perfect certainty. They were moments of genuine engagement. Times when you felt connected to something larger than achievement. Times when your actions reflected your deepest values rather than external expectations. These experiences reveal an important truth. Fulfillment and success are not always the same thing. Success can be measured by the world. Fulfillment can only be measured by the soul. A person may reach every destination marked on society's map and still feel strangely empty. Another may travel an unconventional path filled with uncertainty and yet experience profound meaning. The difference is not necessarily in the outcome. It is in the relationship between the path and the person walking it. The inner compass often reveals itself through recurring patterns. Certain dreams refuse to disappear. Certain questions continue returning. Certain activities create a sense of energy rather than exhaustion. These signals may seem small, but they carry valuable information. They point toward aspects of ourselves that seek expression. Ignoring these signals comes at a cost. Every time we silence our authentic desires to satisfy expectations, a small distance forms between who we are and how we live. Over time, that distance can become significant. We may wake up one day feeling disconnected from our own life, wondering how we arrived somewhere that looks successful yet feels unfamiliar. The good news is that the compass never disappears. Even after years of neglect, it remains present. It waits beneath the noise, beneath the fear, beneath the pressure to conform. It continues offering direction through intuition, values, longing, and meaning. The challenge is not finding the compass. The challenge is becoming quiet enough to hear it and brave enough to trust it. Because there comes a point when following someone else's map becomes more painful than navigating your own unknown territory. And in that moment, a profound shift occurs. You stop asking where others think you should go. You begin asking what feels deeply true. That question changes everything. Not because it provides immediate answers, but because it reconnects you with the source of your own direction. And once a person begins living from that place, they no longer measure their life solely by destinations reached. They measure it by alignment, authenticity, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing they are finally walking a path that belongs to them. Most people believe that transformation is something visible. They expect it to arrive with dramatic change, clear milestones, and unmistakable signs that life is becoming different. But in reality, the deepest transformations are often so quiet that they are almost invisible while they are happening. They do not announce themselves. They do not seek attention. Instead, they unfold in the hidden layers of thought, perception, and emotional understanding. A person can be changing profoundly on the inside while appearing unchanged on the outside. The way they respond to pain begins to shift. The way they interpret silence begins to evolve. The meaning they assign to events slowly reorganizes itself. And yet, because nothing dramatic has occurred externally, they may assume nothing is happening at all. This is where many people underestimate their own growth. We are conditioned to measure progress through external validation. Promotions, achievements, recognition, and visible accomplishments become the standard by which we evaluate our lives. But psychological transformation does not always follow this pattern. Sometimes the most important changes are internal recalibrations that no one else can see. For example, a person who once reacted with anger may begin to pause before responding. That pause is a transformation. A person who once sought validation from others may begin to question why that validation feels necessary. That questioning is a transformation. A person who once avoided emotional discomfort may begin to sit with it rather than escape it. That is also a transformation. These shifts are subtle, but they are foundational. They alter the architecture of identity from the inside. The challenge is that during these invisible transitions, individuals often feel uncertain. They may even feel stuck or confused. This happens because old patterns are dissolving, while new ones have not yet fully formed. It is a space of in-between awareness, where familiar ways of being no longer feel fully authentic, yet new ways have not become stable enough to rely on. This stage can feel uncomfortable because the mind prefers clear definitions. It wants to know who it is, what it believes, and how it should behave. But transformation disrupts these fixed categories. It introduces fluidity where there was once certainty, and in that fluidity, many people mistakenly assume they are losing themselves. In truth, they are encountering themselves more honestly. When the external layers of identity begin to soften, what remains is often more authentic but less familiar. This can create a sense of disorientation. A person may wonder why things that once felt important no longer carry the same emotional weight. They may question relationships, ambitions, or routines that previously felt stable. This questioning is not regression. It is refinement. It is the mind and heart adjusting to a deeper level of awareness. If observed closely, invisible transformations often follow a pattern. First comes awareness. Something once unnoticed becomes visible. Then comes discomfort. The old way of being no longer feels entirely satisfying. Then comes resistance. The individual tries to return to familiar patterns. And finally, there is surrender, a gradual acceptance that change is already happening, whether it is controlled or not. This process is rarely linear. It moves in cycles. There are moments of clarity followed by confusion, moments of insight followed by doubt. Yet beneath these fluctuations, something steady is forming, a new way of relating to oneself and to life. One of the most important realizations during this stage is that growth does not always feel like progress. Sometimes it feels like uncertainty. Sometimes it feels like loss. Sometimes it feels like standing between two versions of yourself without fully belonging to either. But this in-between space is not empty. It is active. It is where identity is being reshaped. It is where old assumptions are dissolving and new understanding is quietly taking root. Over time, what once felt unstable begins to settle. The new awareness becomes more natural. Responses become more conscious. Choices become more aligned. And looking back, a person realizes that what felt like confusion was actually transformation in progress. The irony of invisible transformation is that it only becomes obvious after it has already changed everything. There is a moment in every human life when the search outside begins to lose its power. What once felt like an endless pursuit of answers, validation, improvement, and direction gradually reveals its limitations. Achievements may still come, relationships may still evolve, and circumstances may even improve. Yet something quieter begins to surface beneath it all, a sense that the life being lived is no longer entirely separate from the self living it. This is the beginning of coming home to oneself. It is not a dramatic arrival. It does not feel like victory in the conventional sense. In fact, it often begins with a strange simplicity, a pause where there used to be urgency, a moment of honesty where there used to be avoidance, a recognition that much of what was once pursued so intensely was never truly missing, it was merely misunderstood. Coming home to the self is not about becoming someone new. It is about unlearning the distance that was created between who you are and who you were told to be. Over time, human beings accumulate layers of identity. Some are shaped by expectation, some by fear, some by adaptation, and some by survival. These layers are not false in the sense of being meaningless. They were once necessary. They help navigate environments, relationships, and responsibilities. But necessity is not the same as truth. And what once helped you survive may eventually prevent you from fully living. There comes a point where the inner world begins to ask for simplicity again. Not the simplicity of ignorance, but the simplicity of alignment. A life where thoughts, actions, and values are not in constant negotiation. A life where there is less performance and more presence. Less striving to become and more willingness to be. This return often feels unfamiliar at first. Many people mistake it for emptiness, because they are used to measuring fullness through activity, stimulation, and external affirmation. But what they are encountering is not emptiness, it is space, and space is something the modern mind is rarely trained to appreciate. In that space, something subtle begins to happen. The constant need to prove oneself starts to soften. The urgency to be understood by everyone begins to fade. The pressure to become an ideal version of oneself loses its intensity. What remains is not a lack, but a quieter kind of presence that does not depend on comparison or validation. This is where authenticity begins to take root. Authenticity is not a performance of being real. It is what remains when performance becomes unnecessary. It is the natural expression of a person who is no longer divided against themselves. In this state, choices become clearer not because life becomes simpler, but because inner conflict reduces. One of the most profound realizations in this stage is that much of what was once considered searching for meaning was actually searching for permission to trust what was already known at a deeper level. The answers were never entirely absent. They were simply overshadowed by noise, expectation, and distraction. Coming home to oneself often involves a quiet dismantling of that noise. Old fears lose their authority. Old narratives lose their grip. And slowly, a different kind of listening becomes possible. Not listening outward for direction, but inward for resonance. Life does not suddenly become perfect in this state. Challenges still arise. Uncertainty still exists. Pain still appears. But the relationship to these experiences changes. They are no longer interpreted as signs of failure or misalignment. They are seen as part of a larger unfolding that does not require constant control to be meaningful. There is a deep relief in this recognition. The relief of no longer needing to become someone else in order to feel worthy of existing. The relief of no longer outsourcing identity to external approval. The relief of realizing that what was being searched for in distant places was quietly present beneath layers of forgetting. And in that realization, something soft but irreversible occurs. The search does not end because life has been solved. It ends because the seeker and the sought are no longer experienced as separate. What remains is a more grounded way of being, less about arrival, more about presence, less about becoming, more about remembering. And in that remembering, a person finally begins to live from where they already are.